Well, howdy, and welcome back to economics class, live from somewhere out in the world. if the world's still standing by the time you see this. Anyway, so when we last left our heroes, so to speak, we were learning about monopolies. We'd already talked about perfect competition before we went to this remote deal. And of course, now we'll talk about two more types of market structure, which are monopolistic competition and oligopoly. And so, what is monopolistic competition? So, monopolistic competition is where there still is a level of competition, but each producer in the race is trying to create a sort of monopoly within a competitive structure where their product is differentiated significantly from another in order that they can compete at some level other than just adjusting price. In perfect competition, everything's the same. I'm selling corn, you're selling corn. The only way we really compete with each other, corn tastes exactly the same, looks exactly the same. Only way we can really compete is by dropping price. But in monopolistic competition, we're talking about a scenario where we're trying to kind of create some sort of product differentiation that enables us to get a niche in the market separate from somebody else. So your textbook uses the example of, if you ran a t-shirt shop and, you were trying to sell, like t-shirts from like a monster truck rally, and someone didn't, wanted a lower price, and the, seller next to you is selling like one with like fuzzy kittens or something instead. That's not really competition. You're not in the, they're both t-shirts, right? But they're not really good substitutes for one another, right? Most people who want one shirt are not going to buy the other. So monopolistic competition is an example of, you're trying to differentiate products in significant ways. And so connected is this idea of non-price competition. You're competing at some level other than just trying to be cheaper than the guy next door. Some restaurants won't lower prices as cheap because they want to create the idea of having clout, right? And remember back when there was a thing called restaurants, there was these really cool things. You could go and like sit down and like a lady would come to you and like ask you what kind of food you wanted, and you would order. Someone else would cook it for you. They would come and sit it down on your plate. You could eat right there out in public, like with friends or like other people, and then when you're done, you just paid them a little bit and paid the waitress a tip. And you got to go home. It was great. Hopefully they bring those back one day. God. Okay, so restaurants, back when such a thing existed, had wanted to oftentimes differentiate themselves from the competition by being a place that, for instance, like rich people would want to eat and go on special occasions. So sometimes they wouldn't try to make their steak as cheap as possible. They would try to make it expensive enough that it looked like it had a certain clout. Like people were a little suspicious of the $9 prime rib, right? It's like, well, how are you able to sell this for only $9 if it's any good, right? So that's an example where you're not competing on price. You're competing on quality. You're competing on, you have some sort of twist to your hamburger that nobody else does or whatever, right? The characteristics of what they call monopolistic competition. First off, it's a situation you've got many buyers, many sellers. There's if you're in the market for a hamburger, there's really lots of places you could get it. Well, at least a month ago. Now it's hard to find, but hypothetically. You've got similar but differentiated products, meaning, on one hand, getting a pizza from Whizz's and a pizza from Angelo's, they're going to be in direct competition for each other because you'll both, when you decide, or you can throw in Pizza Hut and whatever else, if you're in the mood for pizza, you're going to be fighting in your head, which of these 3-4 places do I go to? So they're similar, but at the same time they're different, right? Because Whizz's, obviously, you've got, it's sliced kind of different. It's crispier. It's got the whole thin crust thing. Angelo's has a certain, thing. they're more traditional. Their sauce has a certain tang to it. Pizza Hut, it's a level down, but they've got like gimmicks that appeal to people, like the stuffed crust or whatever else. If you're eating at Little Caesars and getting anything other than crazy bread, I pray for your soul. That your taste buds would be healed, or whatever. But so there's there's different aspects to each individual product. It's not the same product. You're not going to go to one and get one from the other and not be able to tell where it came from. So are they in competition? Yes, but there's also an area where they've all kind of got their own little monopoly. And so they'll try to develop ways to kind of differentiate their products one from another. Oftentimes this will be done with the help of market research. And they'll employ something that's called a focus group, that they'll kind of go to people and people will taste test things in the case of food services, or they'll test products, try to get a sense of what is it that people want from a product that would kind of differentiate one from another. Why would you pick an iPhone versus a Samsung? Trust me, Apple and Samsung have both invested quite a bit of money in researching ways where they can find a little wrinkle that the other one hasn't come up with yet, in their cell phones or what have you. So market research, focus grouping, all important parts of how they kind of come up with new ways to differentiate themselves one from another. Another thing that's required with monopolistic competition is a limited control of price. One thing about it, sorry as I wipe my nose and take my life into my hands, I had no idea that it was like a lethal thing to like touch your face until like 2 weeks ago, and now I keep noticing how many times I touch my face in a day. It's a little concerning. But anyway, so it's like evidently touching your face. It's now like when Mario walks into a turtle. Like, have you ever noticed, like in that game, like you can there's this huge distances you can fall. You can jump on top of a turtle's head and it's fine. But if you just like touch the turtle's front, you just die. It's weird. I don't understand it. Anyway, old video game physics fascinate me, but that's beside the point. So limited control of prices, meaning you can't. So perfect competition, you've kind of got no control over prices. The only thing you can do to undercut the competition is to go low. In a monopoly, you're not a price taker, you're a price maker. You can kind of set whatever price you want to set, and people have to decide if it's worth it or not for them. But you're not really having to worry about competition. Monopolistic competition is different. You've got a limited control over price. So the fact that, to go back to our pizza illustration earlier, why is Little Caesars still in business when it tastes like something that a dog threw up? Well, the reason is because they're hot and ready and $5, right? So what? So they found a niche by price. But then you go across the street to a place like Whizz's or Angelo's, has a much better pizza, but they're going to charge three times that money. Now, Pizza Hut's weird because they charge $16, $17 for a pizza, and they're still not what you would consider real pizza, but they still, although I like Pizza Hut, I'll eat there for sure. I ate there last week, but anyway, nonetheless, there's an actual, they've got a limited control over price, but because Whizz's and Angelo's have a different type of product than Little Caesars, they don't have to come down and match Little Caesar. On the other hand, another thing is, in monopolistic competition, there's a lot of freedom to enter and exit the market. It's not hard to get in. It's not hard to get out. All right, so that's monopolistic competition. Changing to look at oligopoly. So what is an oligopoly? So an oligopoly is a market structure where only a few sellers are offering a similar product. And typically, an oligopoly means that a handful of firms have an overwhelming control of what they call the market share. So the market share is the company's percent of total sales within a market. And so, for instance, the automotive industry is probably the best example of this. A handful of firms, Ford, General Motors, Toyota, there's a few more, but there's really 6 or 7 car companies worldwide that pretty much control the whole thing. There's some industries where it's even fewer firms than that. You know, comic books, it's Marvel and DC. It's, you know, had to tell my phone it was low power mode, it was okay. You know, video games, it's Nintendo and Sony and Microsoft, you know. So there's just a handful of firms within a certain area that are really capable of competing. So, and one of the things that causes oligopoly is typically prohibitive startup cost. If it takes too much to get your product off the ground. For instance, let's say you decided that you wanted to start a car company and remain competitive. Well, good luck with that, because you're going to have to get a lot of capital to start a new car company. I mean, a few people have been able to make it happen, you know, and break in. Elon Musk and some people have found ways to break in. But it's very hard to break into the automotive industry. Ford and GM have controlled the American industry for years. You know, Toyota and a couple other Japanese firms controlled the Japanese market for years. You know, obviously there's some European ones you can throw in there too, Volkswagen or whatever. But ultimately, like, it takes a lot of money to get into cars. And then the whole car dealership, the way it's set up, the way the car dealing industry is set up, is largely dependent on people being, you know, a Ford dealer or a Chevrolet dealer or a Jeep dealer. And so it's very hard to just jump in and start a new car company. So few sellers and many buyers. Your textbook uses the example of breakfast cereal, that really Kellogg's and General Mills control, and Post, those three firms control 85+% of the breakfast cereal market. And it's hard just to break in when they have such a distribution network established. It's really hard to kind of disrupt that. The second thing is that they can have standardized or differentiated products. So in some of these cases they're standardized. In a lot of these cases they're differentiated. Cars certainly are differentiated. You know, breakfast cereals certainly are differentiated. A third thing, in an oligopoly, the firms have more control of prices. They do have more control of prices than certainly in a case of perfect competition. A little bit more than monopolistic competition. They're not quite up to monopoly yet. They're not De Beers, and they can just sell a diamond for whatever they want to, because Ford still has to worry about Chevy. But they almost only have to worry about those two. There's not much else that you have to worry about. So it's really hard for one company to just drive the whole industry's, you know, prices down too much. Although, actually, let me back that up and let me rephrase that, because that kind of is misleading, because, you know, you do have to really, when you only have one or two competitors, you do have to really worry about that one or two competitor. But as long as you have to have something that would differentiate you from them in terms of non-price competition, if that was the case. But again, so you've got control, a certain level of control over price there, but it's not like you would have if you had a true monopoly. One thing that is characteristic of oligopolies typically is that it's hard to enter and exit the market. You can't just get in. Startup costs are prohibitive. You don't just start a new car company. You don't just start a new airline company. Remember when they had a thing called airlines? There used to be these things called airplanes that you could get in them, and like they would like fly you to like other places. Back when like other places hadn't been ravaged by the plague. Those were the days, right? Hey, I kid. Don't worry about this whole thing. It's going to blow over shortly. One of these days. Anyway, so market structures, obviously, perfect competition, if we kind of review all the market structures, perfect competition is the best thing for the consumer because supply and demand has the most impact in that sense. It kind of drives prices down. Monopolistic competition, customers also benefit not only from a level of competition, but also from innovation, because people are always trying to come up with a way to get their niche. Oligopolies, though, consumer choices become a little bit more limited. You kind of have, like, finding TV. It's like, you have DirecTV or Dish or cable or a streaming service. And what do you do? And So you only got so many options. It's not like there's hundreds of things that you can do if you want cable. Some places there's only one cable company, so it's them or satellite, which is a little bit of product differentiation there. And then a monopoly, obviously, a monopoly heavily favors the business. If you're the business and you can become a monopoly, you obviously would want to do it as long as you thought that you wouldn't be shut down by trust busting, regulators or what have you. But obviously, that's the worst thing for competition. That's the worst thing for the consumer. I'm only able to get one internet provider that I'm aware of right where I'm at. So I just have to pay whatever they want or else decide that I don't want the internet, which is going to be difficult to do, right? So, that's great if you're CenturyLink. It's not great if you're Luke Fulcher, right? So, obviously, the more competition, the better it is for consumers. All right, so that's it for market structures. Next time, we'll talk about regulation and deregulation.